So I want to talk about the tactics a little bit, and I'll get kind of knee-deep into how do you build a growth team. I think that's probably one of the things that I can provide the most value to you all. Like that's just walk you through the framework that I use when I'm building a growth team, when I'm thinking about growth in general. Before I do that, I want to start a little high level. I want to start at the very highest level of strategy of how should you even think about doing this, should you think about doing it. Some of the stuff that John talked about, although I have a little bit of a different frame of when I decide to do something or not to do it. And then I'm going to walk you through how what the actual framework is of how I build the engine itself, the actual growth team. And then finally, the thing that everybody always loves in these things are like, what's the cool tricks that we've not heard of before? What's the stuff that there are people right now that are out there, growing their products using these tricks and like praying that nobody else finds out that they work so that they can saturate the channel and get all the win for themselves. We'll start off with what I think is the most important part of, and I'll call it user acquisition because I don't like the term growth hacking, so forgive me. But when we're thinking about user acquisition, you have to start off from this frame. You have to start off with your mentality in one specific way, which is you have to create product value before you try to grow your product. You have to have something that is actually like meaningfully valuable to your audience before you grow. And if you have that, then you're doing user acquisition, right? Then you're doing something net positive for the world. If you don't have it, you're a spammer. So don't be a spammer. That's, start off by doing no harm, right? Create value for your audience first. I don't know if anyone knows this guy. He ran the growth team at Facebook for a little while, or for a long while, I should say. I think up to maybe 500 million users or something like that. But has anyone here heard K-factor? No? Okay. So K-factor is basically what a large number of growth hackers or the growth hacking conference or whatever else talks about, is this idea of K-factor, which is for every one user that I acquire, how many new users does that person bring in? And if you think about just optimizing for that one little factor, that turns you into a spammer. Because you're not trying to figure out how do I add value to this person. You're trying to figure out how do I get that person to spam 50 of their friends and get 10 of them to convert into my product, right? So don't focus on K-factor. And I think this is telling that arguably the best growth team, success story of the last decade, the best user acquisition team never thought about K-factor. They didn't even discuss it internally. What they cared about were three things. They cared about how do I acquire customers, where do I find them, and how do I get them to test my product? How do I create an aha moment as fast as I can? Right? How do I actually get them to understand what I'm trying to provide, what my value is? And then how do I deliver value to them as frequently as possible? Once you have all of those things, then you can kind of fine-tune the virality. Right? With that as the start, because I don't want anyone to claim that I am creating spammers, right? So don't be a spammer, do no harm, be good. Okay, so now how do you build a growth engine? You have a product, you have value, you need to you're in this point of building buy ads and you need to grow your team. You need to grow your customer base, you need to grow your suppliers. How do you do it? So the number one thing that you can all take away from this, the thing that's probably the most important, is that speed beats almost everything else. The faster that you iterate, the faster that you work, the faster you test, the faster you prove, and then the faster that you come up with new ideas and try it again, the more you win, right? There's a lot of people right now that kind of market off of, they do marketing off of their gut, what they think is going to work or what feels right. And those people are always wrong, flat out. There's maybe one person in 10,000 that actually has a good gut feel that's never wrong. But generally speaking, you're usually wrong, right? You could be one standard deviation. You could be 15 or 20 percentage points better than the next guy. And if he has 20% more cycles, he's going to beat you, right? So if he does 10 sprints and you do 8, he will beat you every single time. So focus on moving really fast. Try stuff, test it, see if it worked. Try more stuff, test it, see if it worked. It's simple, but that actually is the core engine of what makes a growth team work. So now you think about how do I build a process inside of my business that lets me test stuff quickly? How do I take the speed limiters off my team and help them go fast? Well, the easiest way to do this, and I don't know, how many in the audience are developers? Okay, so you guys will know agile methodology. If you don't know agile methodology, it's a good thing to kind of look up and it's a pretty simple kind of process that you can see for moving fast in development. You can apply agile methodology to marketing, right? And the simplest way to think about this is you create a list of all of the ideas that you have. You literally come down and say, well, I want to test ads on buyads.com. I want to test emailing a bunch of potential properties off of Craigslist if I'm Airbnb. You just come up with a bunch of ideas. And then once you have a large list, you do a sprint plan. And I reckon you can do this once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, right? But that's probably about as long as you want to do it. And again, you want to do it as short as possible. Once you have that list of all the different creative options, you sit down as a team and you get in a room and you argue about which ones you should test. Right? You say, okay, well, what do we think is most likely to be successful? What do we think is the easiest to test? Right? You might say, hey, I think this thing's going to be really successful, but it's going to take us like 6 months to build it and try it. You go, well, let's not do that. Maybe we can find a way to test it in 2 or 3 weeks. We can find a minimum viable product test for that. Or maybe you prioritize something else that maybe is not as impactful, but that you can get immediate data and feedback on right away. So what you're looking at here, and if anybody wants this, email me after or come up to me after, I'll send it to you, is like the brain-dead simple rubric that I use for sprint planning. So all it is you list all of your ideas, and then you apply a 1, 2, or 3 value. You can't really see it, but maybe on the TV. You apply a 1, 2, or 3 value for how many people can it reach, right? What's the audience size? What's the strength of desire inside of that audience? So are you targeting everyone on LinkedIn, or are you targeting just the media planners that you know want your product, right? How kind of well are you targeting your core audience? And then finally, the longevity. Is it sending sausage to somebody in a UPS box, and that works once, and then it's kind of done? Or is it SEO, where it might take a long time to rank, but then you get this kind of steady flow of leads off of that? So you measure these things out. Obviously, the higher the score, the better. And then you compare how hard it is to do and how much competition there is. There's a lot of competition in LinkedIn ads. It still can be the best growth channel for some people, but it's highly competitive, so you have to be aware of that. And literally, this is just simple subtraction at this point. Subtract how good it could possibly be by how difficult it might be, and then have a discussion, right? As a team of 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 people, do you agree with the ranking there, and then can you start acting on those experiments? So once you've got that planned out, you test them, right? You run a week or 2 long sprint of testing all of those different hypotheses. And you look for where can you get just enough data to understand this worked or it didn't work, right? And once something's worked, it's data-driven. So once something has worked, you can see it inside of your data. You can't just feel that it's worked. You have to be able to say, I'm driving my one metric that I care about. I'm driving user acquisition. I'm driving supply acquisition. I'm driving retention, right? It doesn't have to all be about acquisition. It can be any goal that you have inside of your business. But just have one metric that you're pushing for and that you're driving, and prove that you get results out of that. And finally, once you've proven the things that win, double down on those. I think anybody in this room would be very hard-pressed to give me the name of a large internet company that has multiple channels that work all equally. Right? Like, well, we get 10% of our business from email, we get 10% of our business from Facebook, and we get 10% of it from referrals and word of mouth. Almost every business that has a large growth story behind it finds one channel that works exceptionally well. Now, that at some point might phase out, and they have to go find their next channel. But when you find a channel that works, don't go, cool, I got email done, let me move on to the other 10 channels. Double down on that channel. Do the thing that's working until you literally can't pull any more value out of it. You're literally mining the resource of the fact that you've discovered that this works, and that no one else, and that it's not competitive, and no one else is there yet. So, and these slides are all available on SlideShare, and I'm sure we can email them out or whatever else. But if you summarize all that jazz, everything that I just said, what formulas do you get for growth, right? So this is just kind of recapping everything that I said. Create value over everything else. Once you have value, then you can focus on growth. If you're building a startup, this is a bold statement, but I really believe that those are the only 2 things that matter. Create value and grow. Everything else is helping you create value or helping you grow. That's what matters. If you're trying to evaluate a channel, if you're trying to evaluate an idea, right, your channel potential is exactly this. It's audience size divided by how well do they fit into your target audience, or sorry, added to, not divided by, plus how long that channel can stick around. Is it a fly-by-night, flash-in-the-pan thing, or can you actually get long-term value out of it? Finally, marketing. Just if you're like thinking about hiring a marketing person or looking at what makes a good marketing person, it's creative people who can look at and understand and validate their work using data. This sounds simple, it's incredibly hard to find. These are two totally different mindsets. So if you find somebody that embodies both of these, that's what drives good marketing. And if you don't, then you build a team that has both skill sets but in different people. And then finally, you make progress by your raw ability, how smart and talented and good you are at guessing what works, times the number of iterations that you're able to test your opinions. So if you're doing this well, like when you put that, when you put that into a calculator and run it out, the number of iterations is what blows everything else away. So speed wins. Speed is the killer app. Nothing else matters. So now the fun stuff, right? That was all like the boring framework. What are some examples of creative tricks that we found that worked, right? What are some things that are examples of us finding channels that were maybe not competitive yet that we used to fuel our growth? You can see him, the guy in the like maroon pants. This is a buddy of mine who's actually now the CTO of Hired. And the way that he met his two co-founders, who are also pictured here, the guy in the middle is the founder of 99 Designs. The way that he met his two co-founders is he was starting a bunch of kind of small companies on the side, small projects, and trying to have really nice designs built for them without having to hire a designer. And so he'd log into 99 Designs and he'd invite 50 people or 100 people to compete in a contest that he put up to get his site designed. And he learned pretty quickly that you could get some good designs out of it, but it really was predicated on how many people were involved in the contest. So if you got 1,000 designers to compete, you got far better designs out of the process, not surprisingly. So he hacked together a messaging system, basically an email tool, that sat on top of 99 Designs in-site messaging, and he scraped every single one of their designers' profiles and stored how many contests they'd won. And then he would simply, when he wanted to launch a new site, he would select the number of people that he wanted to message. Let's call it 10,000 or 20,000. And it would go and find the 10,000 best designers on the site. And then it would send them a message, a canned message, right? Hey, John, right? I saw that you won last contest that person won, and I really loved your design. I'd really like to work with you. Would you compete in the contest that I just put up? And you got like 10x the response rates. You have like by far the largest participation on the site. So much so that it was obvious, and they found him and they shut him down. And then about a month later, they were all at a conference together, and my friend, whose name's Alan, is the guy with the maroon pants, walked up to the founder of 99 Designs and was like, hey, I'm the guy that hacked your site. Like, really nice to meet you. And the guy's like, oh yeah, that was brilliant. I'm sorry we had to shut you down, but that was really smart. I'd love to work with you. And so the three of them founded this company together, right? And that was literally how they met. They met at a conference, and they all went out drinking that night and were complaining about how hard it is to hire engineers, so they built a tool to make it easier. So, hugely impactful company built literally off the back of a quasi-shady growth hack. Co-branded growth. So this is one that we did at Involver. Again, at Involver, we kind of had a marketing platform that helped people market on Facebook and Twitter and these types of things. One of the tools that we had was free applications that you could install on your Facebook page and put content into it. You could put your videos, you could put your YouTube stuff, you could put music, right? You could put whatever kind of content you had as a marketer. And what we did is at the very bottom of it, we put a little Powered by Involver logo, right? This is similar to John's example of house ads, or similar to the Hotmail example of putting get your free Hotmail account at the bottom of every email. But what we did is we basically exposed our brand to every single person that used one of our customers' products. And we ended up acquiring over 30% of our customers from a small little text link at the bottom of the page, right? So, and this is actually one of the more aggressive versions of what we did. It used to just be a text link that said Powered by Involver, and you click it, and it would show up on our sign-up page. And we acquired 300,000 businesses from that, right? So little things can make huge differences, but none of our competitors did it, and no one had really tried doing it in a social network yet. And so it worked extraordinarily well for us, right? Another example of kind of little tweaks and little things that can work quite well is we added into our sign-up flow at the very last step of the process, once they've installed the application and set up all the settings and done everything, we said, hey, congratulations, you're all set up. You just need to do one more thing before you're complete. Click the like button to like us on Facebook, and that's how we'll communicate with you about updates to our product. And we already had their email, and we already had some other ways, but we knew that the more people we acquired as Facebook fans, the more that we could grow inside of that ecosystem, right? Because we had a base to grow off of. And this, in the process of about 6 months, we acquired over 250,000 likes doing this, over 250,000 fans on Facebook. And then we used those 250,000 fans to remarket and continue to grow off of that. Right? And this is simple stuff. This is like literally we just put a like button at the end of a sign-up flow. And it wasn't mandatory. We kind of made it look like it was, suggested, but it wasn't mandatory. And it worked exceptionally well, right? People just want to get through the click path, right? They want, frankly, a lot of the people wanted to have a way of contacting us and wanted to consume our kind of best practices content, but they didn't do it organically. We had to put it right in front of them and make it very easy, right? So this is another kind of simple trick that worked quite well. And then finally, and this one actually is one of my favorite. John mentioned LinkedIn a couple times. One of the things that I actually probably shouldn't say it on stage because it's still working, but I'm going to. Right now, there's this kind of idea of lightweight channels where you can get someone's attention by sending them some social signal that you're paying attention to them. Think favoriting on Twitter or retweeting on Twitter, right? On LinkedIn, it's visiting someone's profile because we all get the notification that Tyler Willis just visited your profile. And we're curious, right? Well, why did Tyler Willis visit my profile? Let me click in and see who Tyler Willis is. And so what we did is we actually built a tool that goes and visits LinkedIn profiles based on certain search terms. And then we built LinkedIn profiles that looked like landing pages, right? That said, hey, here's the founder of the company, or here's the salesperson that has filled out all of his profile very specifically with like what a new customer would be really interested in seeing or hearing. And then we just set it loose and we visited, you can visit, it turns out you can visit about 700 profiles a day before they shut you off. And so you visit 700 profiles a day, and we got unbelievable viewback rates. 15% of the people that we visited came back and visited our profile, right? So, you think about what that does for your lead gen, right? If you've got one profile that's bringing back, 80 fresh new leads a day without you touching anything, it's pretty cool, right? And so that's an example of kind of one of the tricks or in the weeds things that's worked pretty well for us. And this is, when we find creative channels like this, this is kind of the holy grail of growth hacking, or it's at least the fun stuff that people like talking about. Like when you're out with 3 or 4 people that are all marketing folks, and you're like grabbing beers, you're talking about, okay, what's working, and like what's the crazy thing that you've done, what have you figured out? And there's tons of this. Like there's tons of different areas of exploration that are wide open that no one's thought about yet. And unfortunately, most of the people trying to find them are doing it all wrong. They're doing it to look like a growth hacker or sound like a growth hacker or try to mimic something that somebody said on stage. Don't take my word that LinkedIn works for stuff. Like maybe use that as some inspiration. Maybe use it as an idea starter. But don't just take my word for it that it works and go, okay, I know how we're going to grow our company. We're going to build an autoscraper on LinkedIn. Well, maybe LinkedIn shuts that down tomorrow. Or maybe I'm full of shit, right? So you have to test it. And most people out there doing this stuff are not testing it. And so it really comes back down to that same idea. Come up with ideas, test them. Come up with ideas, test them. Come up with ideas, test them. The faster you can do that, the more you will have success in growing your business. That's what I got. The question was to re-explain the powered by involver trick that worked. Hack, I guess. What we did is we put a small text link on the bottom of our customers' content. So basically our customers would use our applications to display their videos, their songs, their banners, their YouTube accounts, their blogs, whatever content they had. They would use us to basically replicate that content inside of Facebook. And then at the very bottom of it, we just put a powered by involver text link. And we click that link. If you click that link, it would go back to our sign-up page. And so when people would say, for example, a bakery on the corner sets up a Facebook page and puts their RSS feed with their menu on it, and at the very bottom of the menu it says powered by involver. When their competition down the street goes and checks out their Facebook page trying to see what their competition's doing, they say, oh, I see what app they're using. I can use the same app. And that worked exceptionally well. We acquired, by the time that we were acquired by Oracle, we had over 1 million customers. We actually ended up with quite a large number, over 1 million customers. I think we had like 2 or 3 by the end of it. And we acquired over 30% of them through that powered by link. So a very simple thing, but it worked very well. Okay, so the question was, what tips would you give to somebody who wanted to find and reach small businesses online? Having done that for 3 or 4 years, my first answer would be don't. It's really hard. Yeah, exactly. It is doable, but it's very hard. The problem is small business owners are generally not aggressively technically savvy. Like, they're not spending all sorts of time on the internet, trying to find ways to build their business. In fact, 90% of the time, they've got unbelievable demands on their time just keeping the business running. If you're running a bakery, you don't spend a lot of time on bakerytips.com figuring out how to run a better bakery. Like, you bake stuff, right? And add to that you got to have employees, and you got to pay them, and you got to deal with your accountant. You're overwhelmed as a small business owner, and the last thing that you want to do is go find one more thing to do. If something worked, you'd be all for it, because you're also, you're scared and you want everything to work and you want to grow, and you're sometimes even out of your element. So you really do want to hear the strategies that work. You just don't have time to figure out what works and what doesn't work. So almost all the big success stories and people that reach small businesses either reached online small businesses. So they targeted people who were like consultants, or they targeted people who were small software shops or things like this. Or they had direct sales. Now, there are ways that you can kind of get around that. So for example, one of the tricks that I would use if I were doing this today is I would go out and go to the small business chambers of commerce. In the US, we've got every city has its own little coalition that kind of allows small business owners to network. I would try something like that. I might try something like sponsoring a meetup in every city I'll create the content and trying to find a network of small business owners that want to bring a bunch of other small business owners together so that they can network and maybe do customer swapping and things like that. And I'll create the content and I'll walk them through it, but I'm basically kind of leveraging or building a distribution network to get to everyone around me. I might try to find college kids who wanted experience with growth hacking or internet marketing or these types of things, and give them ways to kind of engage their local community. So you trade them kind of mentorship or experience in return for having an extended labor force. Those are things I would try, but it would be very hard and very expensive.
To add some things on to the very correct answer, Tyler mentioned, well, actually the first thought that popped into my head when that question came up at how do I reach small businesses, my first thought was pray. Because it's tough, it's very tough. Tyler mentioned one of the few ways that you can actually look at success stories is one was direct sales, and Groupon is a perfect example of that. Groupon had 3,000 salespeople. It wasn't a technology business. It was they growth hacked how to get a lot of people making a lot of phone calls every day to small businesses, and that's how they got the deals. That was their growth hack. We're going to employ 3,000 people to just make phone calls all day. Some little tips that I would throw in there when you're trying to reach small business owners. Two things. One, email as a marketing channel still works surprisingly well. We, as kind of entrepreneurial, hacky type folks, tend to think, oh, it's got to be some sexy new thing. Email actually tends to still be really freaking great with conversion rates. Another thing would be, and these are all of course dependent on the cohort, but another thing would be these very busy small business people that Tyler mentioned, which is absolutely very true, they tend to be the people that then go to a conference once a year to learn, right? They tend to be thinking, I'm bogged down with my bakery every day, and they take 2 days to go to a conference to learn about the cool shit that's happening. Whereas for us, like if you've ever gone to like an industry kind of conference, the content tends to not be very interesting. The conversations in the hallway tend to be very interesting. But for small business owners, they tend to be the ones that go and buy a ticket and they're like, yes, I'm here to learn. So those conferences can actually be a good way, the right conferences can be a good way to reach small business owners because they're actually there to learn and it's like their one big trip per year?
The reason that my suggestions were really vague was because I don't know that market and I don't know the customer. So when it comes down to building an acquisition funnel, the key thing is to understand the psychology of your customer really well and figuring out how you can break through the noise and get their attention. So a meta point here is focus on if you are acquiring somebody, don't ask necessarily or trust advice from people who aren't targeting the same audience, because they won't have the experience in how to reach that one specific person.
We talked primarily about web-based businesses, B2B. What about a different market? Your example was mobile, but a different market. Tyler mentioned when the question about how to reach small businesses came up. The point, I'm always hesitant to say, oh, for that market, do X, Y, and Z. Because I think part of our message here is the process of growth hacking is finding out your cohort, your customers, and then trying to experiment and be quick about it to find the underexploited channels. So Tyler might have some kind of off the top of his head ideas about mobile, but the core message here is there's more of a process to this. And it's not a checklist, it's more of a frame of mind that we don't want to prescribe to you, here's this silver bullet growth hacking thing. That's one of the things that I don't like about growth hacking and kind of how that word has evolved is people think it's like this secret bag of tricks, like Hermione's thing where it's like really deep and you can just pull crap out of it. It's not necessarily that way. It depends on who's your customer, what's the product, what's the value, how quickly can they get to their aha moment, and it's all dependent on those prerequisites. The key is finding out through rapid experimentation what are the underexploited ways that you can reach them. We don't know what that is for your business. Sorry.
Exactly. I mean, just to hammer that point home, you know, one of the things that's working exceptionally well in the US right now is SMS messaging and user acquisition through SMS. And I don't know how well that works outside of the US market. I mean, in fact, I imagine it would work better in markets that have unlimited text messaging as the norm as part of the plan. But I've also seen some data that indicates that it works pretty well in Asia and Indonesia and other places. So I think the mobile market's really screwed up. There is no dominant channel for acquisition, which that's actually the huge opportunity right now is anyone who can figure out how to build. I mean, one of the next billion-dollar businesses will be somebody who figures out how to create a scalable and logical channel for mobile acquisition. Actually, not one of the next, the last, right? Like Facebook just announced that over 25% of their revenue is paid app installs, right? And it's a massive amount of money. So there is what that tells you is there's a lot of pent-up desire to acquire users on mobile and no good ways of doing it because people are paying 50 cents, $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 a user. And the fact that so many people are doing that means that there's no like breakthrough that's happened on the organic side. So that's a huge opportunity. If you can figure it out, you can build a huge business and have a massive competitive advantage. You have to figure it out.
Question is, what tools do you use for measurement, for funnel, for running experiments, those kinds of things? The good news is, especially as basically product marketing has rebranded as growth hacking and it's become a cool thing the last few years, there's been a huge swell of products and tools that have been built to make running through this process to figure out what works for you better and simpler. Because years ago, we would have to really build all this stuff in-house. Like we had to build an email funnel measurement module in-house. I had to waste engineering time to do that, whereas today, you can just turn it on in 2 minutes from a product that has productized that. We experimented with a bunch of different stuff at iSocket, everything from kind of Keen.io, Kiss metrics, certainly MailChimp in the normal funnels, your standard kind of Google Analytics funnels, tying Google Analytics to, because part of one of our products that was very growth hacky, the one that we could apply those principles to was also like an e-commerce engine, so the ultimate action was people spending money. So we could tie the whole thing to like your normal kind of shopping cart abandonment stuff. So all the best practices, there's tons of tools, Optimizely, things that you can use to quickly set up split tests, things that you can do to set up lifecycle email triggers, both in terms of the tools that handle the logic of the trigger of when to send an email, and then certainly tools like SendGrid that can do the emails for you so you don't have to deal with SMTP anymore. So there's lots of stuff out there. I can't even keep track of them all anymore. They're all more or less the same. You just certainly don't want to overinvest in it. You don't want to take weeks to really get fine-grained with setting up your lifecycle email triggers. You can lean startup your way through that as well in terms of investing in a tool, setting it up without taking a month to set it up and find out that that funnel doesn't even work for you. So treat it as smart as you would treat any other investment. So the question is, would we test new things on clients or would we only test it internal? Is that correct? I think it depends on the business. Like if you have a business where the nature of your customer and the nature of your relationship is that if you screw up once, you lose them forever, then that would maybe make you more resistant to doing this. But in our business, we would experiment on our customers. So I'll give you an example. You know how these kind of product meetings go, where you're sitting around with your teammates and you're going, oh, we should allow Bitcoin as a payment method in our checkout process. And it was like, well, why? Sure, it's cool and it sounds cool, but how do we know that that's going to work? So an easy example of something that we did, it wasn't Bitcoin for us, but it was PayPal. Some people were like, oh, I won't use your product unless advertisers can pay with PayPal, because we had credit card and those kinds of things. Now, the PayPal, it's gotten a lot better, but at the time, actually integrating PayPal into your own shopping cart experience as opposed to sending them to PayPal was a pain in the ass. So just like I said 2 minutes ago, before investing in that, we wanted to measure it. So on our checkout page, we added the option, pay with PayPal, as one of the options. And if you clicked on it, you got a modal pop-up that said, thanks for clicking that. We were curious how many people would like to pay with PayPal. We recorded your answer, but for now, pay with credit card. And it was okay. Nobody called us up and they were like, oh, you guys are assholes. They were, maybe one. It was okay. So like that, it took us 10 minutes to decide to do that, put it in the front end markup and commit it and push it and write a test for it. And we learned that no, it really wasn't that important. Not a lot of people clicked on it. And the ones that did had very little abandonment. They just said, okay, I'll pay with a credit card. So we saved ourselves a week of dealing with PayPal's API by experimenting on them on an outward fashion. That's not really growthy, but since your question was, would you experiment on your customers? Yeah, absolutely. And if you don't, you're not really learning, right? A core lean startup principle, get out of the building. No business plan survives first contact with the customers. If in some way or another you're not experimenting on or with your customers, you're not learning. The key is doing it just enough where you don't blow your first impression or lose them forever. So the question was, I gave the example at the beginning, how I took 2 guys on my team and I called them the growth team. And I said, you guys are going to focus on learning whether or not this new product can grow with growth hacking principles as opposed to salesman principles. And we learned that it wasn't going to work well enough for us to justify that investment from a structural company CEO perspective. And the question is, how did we bounce back from that? You know, the good news is we didn't have to bounce back from it, because if you do it right and you have the right culture, and a lot of that comes from the top and from hiring the right people, it wasn't something to bounce back from. Like one of the 2 guys, the engineer side of the equation, he said, I'm going to help figure out whether or not this is going to work, and I know that if I help prove it's not going to work, I'm out of a job. But he still did it with as much enthusiasm as if he didn't know that. And when we came to the conclusion that it wasn't the thing to pursue, they were, I mean, I think they were bummed. They were a little like, oh, we were really excited about this product, but it wasn't a killer. It wasn't something to really have to bounce back from. Because if you're in that situation, that means you did things wrong before then. So I think it's more of a right mindset, right people, right culture, which not only obviously comes from hiring the right people, but it especially comes from the top in terms of the founders. I mean, the founders set the culture in almost every way in the company, and this is just one of those examples, because if you value failing in an experiment as much as you value succeeding, I figured out 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb, then that is going to be a cultural value that will guide those types of situations and prevent them from becoming a disaster.
If you notice, like during the talk that you probably learned the same amount, hopefully, from John and I. John's entire learnings have been around what didn't work for his business. It's literally as important, if not more important, than the stuff that does work. And so I think culturally being okay with failure is a big part of it. Culturally encouraging failure is a big part of it. And actually this is going to be a little screwed up, part of the fun stuff in the growth team is when somebody comes to you with an idea, they're like, hey, this is going to work. And you're like, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. I'll prove it to you it doesn't work. And you put it in and you go, yep, didn't work. I've got the data that proves it, right? And then that person goes, oh, okay, maybe I don't have like this all-knowing, all-seeing power that I thought I did before. And it's really nice to be able to have a culture that's centered around, like, you have to come, we trust in God, all others bring data, right? Like, really being able to set a team up around the idea of we're going to know what works and doesn't work first. That's what makes them excited. Doesn't matter whether they find out whether it works or doesn't work. If they figured out something new, that's what makes them excited. It's kind of scientific method-y. Yeah, so the same answer applies for that from the one in the mobile side, which is I can't be prescriptive about a market that I don't know, inside and out know. We have done, obviously, some of this stuff targeting developers with hired, because developers are the supply part of that marketplace. But I mean, without having a real deep dive on like the developer tools side of the business, I have a hard time kind of prescribing what works and what doesn't work there. Folks that have done a really good job there, GitHub certainly has, right? GitHub's done a really nice kind of network effects model. Whenever they bring somebody on, and then as they bring on more projects and more people, their kind of value grows. And my understanding of it, without having been too close to that story, is that really was predicated early on open source projects. So open source was this natural thing where if you got an open source project involved, you get all sorts of contributors involved as well. And so they kind of used that as their kickstart to growth. Although frankly, they're also a really good example of what John was talking about providing value to one part of the market first. There was a great single player experience there. You didn't need to have other people collaborating with you to have it be a useful repository. Twilio did a very good job of growing inside of developer communities. PayPal did and does a very good job of growing inside of developer communities. Braintree, another good example of this. So there's people out there that have done this quite well, but I don't know well enough to give you specific advice.
So again, as you've heard multiple times, part of the key of this is finding underexploited but authentic channels. Are you a developer? Are you a developer? But there's developers in the room. Of people who are developers, how many of you like getting spammy LinkedIn messages?
Everyone.
But you know what I'm talking about, right? The recruiters and all that bullshit, right? So what's interesting about developers as a example of a target cohort is they tend to be pretty pragmatic. They don't like fluffy bullshit the way that maybe more like a salesperson would. So don't do things like spam LinkedIn messages, because we know that that's not going to work. Find the channels that are authentic and genuine, but maybe underexploited. Maybe it's interesting things through GitHub or through communities where they already exist. I think we can easily identify Twilio as an example that did it well, and Danielle, the girl that built their early growth, is a friend of ours and did a fantastic job, but they had a little bit of an unfair advantage because 4 years ago, there were a lot less companies targeting developers. So it's a lot harder now, like you said, with all the noise. But given that your audience is that much more pragmatic than average, to Tyler's first point in his presentation, you've got to have value there. Because engineers are going to know, I'm not going to deal with something if it doesn't make sense. So no, all the growth hacking in the world isn't going to matter if you don't have that core value. If you do, I believe in a very simple principle of prove that you have that value, and then find a way to tell as many other people about it as possible, or to help your customers, like your early adopters, tell as many people about it as possible. Because especially in the developer community, right, you're going to hear about a stack or a tool or an IDE that is great, and no amount of growth hacking is going to convince me to use Vim.